The steel hulls of 6 American warships cut through the dark waters of Manila Bay as the first gray light of May 1, 1898, crept across the horizon. Commodore George Dewey stood on the bridge of his flagship, the USS Olympia, his weathered hands gripping the rail as he peered through the morning mist. What awaited him in these foreign waters would either cement his place in naval history or end his career in catastrophic defeat. The previous evening had been filled with tension as Dewey's Asiatic squadron approached the entrance to Manila Bay. Intelligence reports suggested that Admiral Patricio Montoya's Spanish Pacific squadron lay anchored somewhere within the vast harbor, but the Americans had no precise knowledge of their enemy's position or strength. The Commodore had spent sleepless hours poring over charts and battle plans. Knowing that the coming engagement would mark America's first major naval battle against a foreign power since the Mexican-American War 50 years earlier, as recorded in the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History archives, Dewey had initially waited at Mears Bay for American Consul Oscar Williams II arrived from Manila with crucial intelligence about Spanish movements. The delay had cost precious time, but Williams brought vital information that Admiral Canoyo had initially moved to Subic Bay before returning to Manila's waters. The American squadron consisted of the protected cruisers Olympia, de Baltimore, Raleigh, and Boston, along with the gunboats Concord and Petrel. Each vessel bristled with modern naval artillery, their crews trained to precision under Dewey's demanding leadership. The men had spent months preparing for this moment, conducting endless gunnery drills and tactical exercises that would soon prove their worth in the crucible of combat. Dewey's orders from Washington had been clear and decisive: destroy the Spanish fleet in Philippine waters. The outbreak of the Spanish-American War had transformed what began as a Cuban independence movement into a global conflict. With battles raging from the Caribbean to the Pacific, the Philippines represented Spain's last significant naval stronghold. In Asian waters, its capture would effectively end Spanish colonial power in the Pacific. The Commodore understood the broader implications of his mission. Success here would not only advance American strategic interests, but also signal the emergence of the United States as a legitimate Pacific naval power. The old European colonial order was crumbling, and America stood poised to claim its place among the world's maritime empires. As the squadron approached the narrow entrance to Manila Bay, Dewey ordered his ships to battle stations. The familiar sounds of preparation echoed across the water, the clatter of ammunition being moved to gun positions, the sharp commands of officers, and the steady rhythm of machinery as each vessel prepared for action. Steam pressure gauges showed optimal levels. Gun crews stood ready at their stations, and lookouts strained their eyes, searching for the first glimpse of Spanish masts. The bay stretched nearly 30 miles from north to south, providing ample maneuvering room for naval combat, but also offering numerous hiding places for an enemy fleet. Dewey knew that Montoya possessed several advantages: intimate knowledge of local waters, shore-based artillery support, and the defensive benefits of choosing his own anchorage. However, the American commander possessed superior firepower, better trained crews, and the tactical advantage of a unified squadron operating under a single command structure. The entrance to Manila Bay presented a formidable challenge even without enemy opposition. Corregidor Island dominated the mouth of the harbor, its ancient Spanish fortifications commanding the narrow passage that all ships must navigate. As Dewey's squadron approached in single-file formation during the pre-dawn hours of May 1st, the men could see the dark silhouettes of gun emplacements carved into the rocky cliffs above. The Olympia led the way, her bow cutting through the calm waters at reduced speed to maintain formation integrity. Behind her followed the Baltimore, Raleigh, Boston, Concord, and Petrel, each vessel maintaining precise intervals while their crews remained at general quarters. The tension was palpable, as every sailor understood that Spanish coastal artillery could open fire at any moment, potentially devastating the closely spaced American ships. Before they could reach maneuvering room, Dewey had calculated this risk carefully during his approach planning. The Spanish fortifications on Corregidor and El Fraile Islands were known to be antiquated, their guns likely ineffective against modern steel warships moving at speed. More importantly, Recent intelligence suggested that many of the shore batteries were unmanned or poorly maintained after years of colonial neglect. The Commodore decided to run the gauntlet rather than attempt a time-consuming bombardment that would alert the Spanish fleet to his presence. As the American column passed beneath guns of Corregidor, a few sporadic shots rang out from the Spanish positions. The shells fell harmlessly into the water, their outdated gunpowder charges producing more smoke than accuracy. Dewey's gamble had paid off. The shore defenses proved utterly inadequate to halt a determined modern fleet. Within minutes, all 6 American vessels had successfully navigated the entrance and entered the broad expanse of Manila Bay proper. The sunrise revealed a magnificent natural harbor, its calm waters stretching to the distant shore where Manila's ancient walls could be seen rising above the waterline. Coconut palms lined the tropical coastline, while fishing boats scattered in all directions as their crews recognized the approaching warships. The beauty of the scene stood in stark contrast to the deadly business at hand. Dewey immediately ordered his squadron to battle formation, with the Olympia maintaining the lead, while the other cruisers formed a line ahead at 400-yard intervals. The gunboats Concord and Petrel took positions on the disengaged side, ready to exploit any breakthrough or provide fire support as needed. This classic naval formation had been perfected through centuries of sea warfare, allowing each ship to bring its full broadside to bear while maintaining mutual support. Through his binoculars, Dewey began scanning the harbor for signs of the Spanish fleet. The bay contained numerous anchorages and inlets where enemy vessels might be hidden, and the morning mist still obscured many areas near the shore. Reports from Filipino informants had suggested that Montoyo's squadron was anchored near Cavite, a fortified peninsula jutting into the southern portion of the bay, but visual confirmation remained elusive. The American crews maintained their heightened state of readiness as the squadron methodically swept the harbor. Gun crews stood beside their weapons with shells already loaded, while engine room personnel monitored boiler pressure and prepared for combat maneuvering. Every man understood that the coming battle would likely determine not only their individual fates but also the future of American naval power in the Pacific. As the morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of mist, the distinctive outlines of Spanish warships finally became visible against the distant shore. At approximately 5:15 in the morning, as the tropical sun burned away the last wisps of harbor mist, Commodore Dewey's lookouts spotted the unmistakable silhouettes of the Spanish Pacific Squadron anchored in Carrizallo Bay, just west of the Cavite Naval Station. Through his powerful naval binoculars, Dewey could make out 7 Spanish warships arranged in what appeared to be a defensive line, their dark hulls stark against the pale morning sky. Admiral Patricio Montoyo had positioned his fleet with considerable tactical thought. Despite the overwhelming disadvantages he faced, his flagship, the Reina Cristina, occupied the center of the Spanish line, flanked by the Castilla, Don Antonio de Ulloa, Don Juan de Austria, Isla de Luzon, Isla de Cuba, and the gunboat General Lazo. The Spanish commander had anchored his vessels in relatively shallow water, hoping to minimize casualties by allowing his crews to swim to shore if their ships were sunk. The Spanish squadron presented a mixture of obsolete and aging vessels that reflected the declining state of Spain's once mighty naval empire. The Reina Cristina, though serving as flagship, was an unprotected cruiser built in 1887. With outdated armor and guns, the Castilla was an ancient wooden vessel that had been partially modernized, but remained essentially a relic from an earlier era of naval warfare. The smaller Spanish gunboats, while newer in construction, carried light armament that would prove inadequate against American cruisers. Dewey immediately recognized the Spanish tactical position and its implications. Montoyo had sacrificed mobility for the psychological comfort of proximity to shore, but this decision would prove fatal in the coming engagement. The shallow anchorage would prevent effective maneuvering while providing the Americans with predictable targets. More importantly, Spanish formation lacked the concentrated firepower necessary to overwhelm any single American vessel. As the range closed to approximately 6,000 yards, Dewey could see frantic activity aboard the Spanish ships as their crews scrambled to battle stations. Smoke began pouring from Spanish funnels as engineers desperately attempted to raise steam pressure for emergency maneuvering. Signal flags flew between the enemy vessels as Montoyo tried to coordinate his scattered command for the coming battle. The Cavite shore batteries also showed signs of activity, with gun crews visible around the antiquated artillery pieces that had been in place to defend the naval station. However, these coastal guns dated from the colonial period and would prove even less effective than the ship-mounted weapons they were meant to support. Spanish defensive planning had clearly anticipated raids by individual vessels or small squadrons, not a concentrated assault by a modern battle. Fleet WWII ordered his squadron to reduce speed and maintain formation as they approached the optimal firing range. The American battle line stretched across nearly half a mile of water, each ship's crew trained to perfection and eager for action. Gun crews made final adjustments to their weapons, while ammunition handlers stood ready with additional shells. The mechanical precision of American naval gunnery would soon demonstrate its superiority over Spanish desperation. At 5:40 in the morning, with the range having closed to approximately 5,000 yards, Commodore Dewey turned to his flag captain and delivered the words that would echo through American naval history: "You may fire when ready, Gridley." Captain Charles Gridley immediately relayed the command to the Olympia's gun crews, and the first American salvo thundered across Manila Bay. The 8-inch guns of the Olympia's main battery erupted in perfect synchronization, sending shells screaming toward the Spanish line at nearly 2,000 feet per second. The Baltimore, Raleigh, and Boston followed within seconds, their own guns adding to the devastating barrage that now fell upon Montoyo's helpless squadron. The Battle of Manila Bay had begun in earnest, and the age of American naval dominance in the Pacific was about to be born. The first American salvo struck the Spanish line with devastating precision, sending towering columns of water and debris skyward as shells found their marks. The USS Olympia's 8-inch guns had been targeted on the Reina Cristina, and within minutes, the Spanish flagship was wreathed in smoke and flame. Admiral Montoyo's vessel shuddered under the impact of multiple hits, her upper works shattered, and her crew scrambling to maintain fighting capability. Dewey's tactical plan unfolded with mechanical precision. As his battle line swept past the Spanish anchorage at a range of 3,000 yards, each American vessel delivered a carefully aimed broadside before following the Olympia in a wide turn that would bring them back for another devastating pass. This classic naval maneuver, known as crossing the T, allowed the Americans to concentrate their full firepower against the Spanish line. While minimizing their own exposure to return fire, the Spanish response was immediate, but tragically ineffective. Montoyo's gunners fired with desperate courage, but their obsolete weapons and inferior ammunition proved woefully inadequate against modern American steel. Spanish shells that managed to strike American hulls either bounced harmlessly off armored surfaces or exploded with insufficient force to cause significant damage. The technological gap between the two fleets became horrifyingly apparent within the first minutes of combat. Captain Charles Gridley coordinated the Olympia's fire with the calm professionalism that characterized American naval gunnery. His gun crews worked with practiced efficiency, loading, aiming, and firing in steady rhythm, while spotters called out corrections for range and bearing. The result was a sustained barrage of accurate fire that systematically dismantled Spanish resistance with each passing minute. The Baltimore, under Captain Nehemiah Dyer, focused her attention on the Spanish gunboat General Lezo and the older cruiser Castilla. The Baltimore's modern rapid-fire guns proved particularly effective against the lightly armored Spanish vessels, raking their decks with devastating effect while her heavier weapons targeted vital machinery and gun positions. Within 20 minutes of the battle's commencement, both Spanish vessels were burning fiercely and listing heavily. Meanwhile, the Raleigh and Boston concentrated their fire on the smaller Spanish gunboats that attempted to maneuver closer to shore. These vessels, while newer than some of their consorts, carried insufficient armor to withstand sustained bombardment from American cruisers. Their crews fought with remarkable bravery, maintaining fire even as their ships disintegrated around them. But courage could not compensate for overwhelming its material disadvantage. The Spanish shore batteries at Cavite attempted to support their fleet by engaging the American squadron, but their ancient guns proved completely ineffective against modern warships. Spanish artillery pieces, some dating from the early 1800s, could not achieve sufficient range or accuracy to threaten Dewey's vessels. American counter-battery fire quickly silenced most of the shore positions, adding to the general destruction that was consuming Spanish resistance. As the American battle line completed its first pass and began turning for a second approach, the extent of Spanish losses became apparent. The Reina Cristina was down by the bow and burning furiously, her main battery silenced and her crew beginning to abandon ship. The Castilla had settled in the shallow water with her decks awash, while several smaller Spanish vessels were clearly beyond salvage. In less than 30 minutes of combat, Montoyo's squadron had been effectively destroyed as a fighting force. The one-sided nature of the engagement reflected not only American material superiority, but also the professional excellence of Dewey's crews. Months of intensive training under the Commodore's demanding leadership had produced gun crews capable of sustained, accurate fire under combat conditions. The Americans maintained their rate of fire throughout the engagement, while Spanish gunnery deteriorated rapidly as casualties mounted and equipment failed. By 7 in the morning, after less than 2 hours of sustained bombardment, the Spanish Pacific Squadron had been reduced to burning wreckage scattered across Curacao Bay. Admiral Montoyo, his flagship Reina Cristina sinking beneath him, made the agonizing decision to transfer his flag to the Isla de Cuba in a desperate attempt to continue resistance. However, even this gesture of defiance proved futile as American shells continued to rain down with deadly precision. Commodore Dewey, observing the complete destruction of enemy resistance from the bridge of the Olympia, made a tactical decision that would become legendary in naval annals. Rather than continue the bombardment against helpless targets, he ordered his squadron to withdraw to the center of the bay for a damage assessment and breakfast. This pause in combat, lasting approximately 2 hours, demonstrated the overwhelming nature of American victory and Dewey's supreme confidence in the outcome. During this interlude, American damage control parties conducted thorough inspections of their vessels and found virtually no significant battle damage. A few Spanish shells had struck American hulls without penetrating, while several had passed through rigging and superstructure, causing minor casualties. The USS Baltimore reported the most serious damage: 8 men wounded by splinters from a shell that had exploded nearby. The entire American squadron remained fully operational and ready for continued action. The contrast with every vessel in Montoyo's squadron had been either sunk, beached, or so heavily damaged as to be beyond repair. Spanish casualties included over 100 killed and wounded, while their flagship lay on the bottom of Curacao Bay, with her colors still flying from the mainmast. The Castilla had settled in shallow water, with only her upper works visible. While the smaller gunboats were either sinking or burning out of control, Spanish shore installations at Cavite had fared no better under American bombardment. The naval arsenal, with its machine shops and supply depots, was largely destroyed by accurate fire from the American cruisers. Spanish coastal batteries had been systematically silenced, their antiquated guns no match for modern naval artillery. The entire defensive complex that had taken decades to construct was reduced to ruins in a matter of hours. At 11 in the morning, Dewey ordered his squadron to resume action and complete the destruction of any remaining Spanish resistance. The second phase of the battle proved even more one-sided than the first, as American gunners methodically finished off vessels that had survived the initial bombardment. The Spanish gunboat, Ulloa, which had managed to beach herself near Cavite, was destroyed by concentrated fire from multiple American vessels. Admiral Montoyo, recognizing the hopelessness of further resistance, finally ordered the white flag raised over his remaining vessels. The formal surrender came at 12:30 in the afternoon, exactly 7½ hours after the first shots had been fired. Spanish officers were taken aboard American vessels as prisoners of war, while their crews were paroled on condition that they not serve against American forces for the duration of hostilities. The Battle of Manila Bay was over, and its outcome had exceeded even the most optimistic American expectations. Dewey's squadron had achieved what naval historians would later recognize as one of the most complete victories in maritime warfare history. The Spanish Pacific Squadron had been entirely destroyed without the loss of a single American life to enemy action. While Spanish casualties numbered in the hundreds, the strategic implications of this crushing victory became immediately apparent. Spanish naval power in the Pacific had been eliminated in a single morning's work, opening the entire Philippine archipelago to American occupation. The psychological impact was equally significant, as news of Dewey's triumph would electrify American public opinion and establish the United States as a legitimate Pacific naval power. Then the immediate aftermath of the battle revealed the magnitude of American achievement and Spanish catastrophe. As the smoke cleared over Manila Bay, Commodore Dewey's squadron controlled the entire harbor, effectively cutting off Manila from any hope of reinforcement or resupply from Spain. The Spanish colonial government, isolated and defenseless, would have no choice but to negotiate from a position of complete weakness. Dewey wasted no time in consolidating his victory. He immediately established a naval blockade of Manila, preventing any vessel from entering or leaving the harbor without American permission. This action effectively isolated the Spanish garrison in the city and began the process of economic strangulation that would eventually force surrender. The Commodore also dispatched the revenue cutter McCulloch to Hong Kong with news of the victory, ensuring that Washington would learn of American success with minimal delay. The heroism displayed by American sailors during the engagement became the stuff of legend as reports reached the United States. Gun crews had maintained their rate of fire throughout the battle despite the heat and smoke of combat, while engine room personnel had kept their vessels at maximum efficiency under the most demanding conditions. The professional excellence of the American Navy was demonstrated not only in victory but in the restraint shown toward defeated enemies. Spanish bravery in the face of impossible odds also earned American respect. Admiral Montoyo had fought his obsolete squadron with dignity and courage, maintaining resistance long after the outcome became obvious. Spanish sailors had continued serving their guns even as their ships burned around them, displaying the fighting spirit that had once made Spain a formidable naval power. Their defeat reflected technological and strategic disadvantages rather than any lack of personal courage. The international reaction to news of Manila Bay was swift and significant. European naval powers, which had long dismissed American maritime capabilities, suddenly recognized that the United States had emerged as a legitimate global naval force. British observers were particularly impressed by the precision and efficiency of American gunnery, while German naval experts began reassessing their own Pacific strategies in light of this demonstration of American strength. Within the Philippines, the battle's outcome triggered a complex series of political and military developments that would shape the island's future for decades. Filipino independence fighters, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, saw American victory as an opportunity to achieve freedom from Spanish rule. However, they would soon discover that American intentions included permanent occupation rather than immediate independence. Setting the stage for future conflict, the Spanish colonial administration in Manila found itself in an impossible position. Cut off from reinforcement and facing a powerful American fleet that could bombard the city at will, Governor-General Basilio Agustin had few options beyond eventual surrender. Spanish forces throughout the archipelago were similarly isolated, as American naval control made communication and coordination virtually impossible. Commodore Dewey's personal transformation from relative obscurity to national hero occurred with remarkable speed. Within days of the battle, his name was known throughout America as cables carried news of the stunning victory to every major newspaper. Songs were written about his triumph, while his famous command to fire when ready gridly became a catchphrase. Repeated across the nation, the strategic consequences of Manila Bay extended far beyond the immediate military situation. American possession of the Philippines would provide a forward base for Pacific operations, while also creating new responsibilities and challenges that the nation had never before faced. The United States was evolving from a continental power into a global empire with all the opportunities and burdens that such transformation entailed. The Battle of Manila Bay marked a watershed moment in American naval history and global power relationships that would resonate for generations. Within hours of Dewey's victory, the United States had established itself as the dominant naval force in the Western Pacific, fundamentally altering the strategic balance that had existed since the age of European colonial expansion. The implications of this transformation would be felt from Washington to London. From Berlin to Tokyo, President William McKinley received news of the victory through a cable that reached Washington on May 2, 1898. The message was brief but electrifying. The Spanish fleet had been completely destroyed with minimal American casualties. McKinley immediately recognized that this triumph had exceeded all strategic expectations and created new possibilities for American expansion that had not existed before the battle. The president ordered immediate preparations for an expeditionary force to occupy the Philippines and consolidate Dewey's naval victory with ground forces. Congressional reaction was euphoric as legislators grasped the magnitude of American achievement. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge proclaimed that Manila Bay had announced America's arrival as a world power, while newspapers across the nation celebrated Dewey as the greatest naval hero since John Paul Jones. The victory provided powerful momentum for expansionist policies that would transform the United States from a regional power into a global empire with overseas territories spanning 2 oceans. The technological lessons of Manila Bay were studied intensively by naval experts worldwide. American gunnery had proven devastatingly superior to Spanish efforts. Demonstrating the importance of modern fire control systems and intensive crew training, the battle also highlighted the obsolescence of wooden warships and antiquated coastal fortifications when faced with steel vessels carrying high explosive shells. Naval architects and strategists began redesigning their concepts of fleet composition and tactical doctrine based on American success. European colonial powers watched American expansion with a mixture of admiration and concern. The British government, while publicly congratulating American success, privately worried about potential challenges to British dominance in Asian waters. Germany began accelerating its own naval construction programs, recognizing that the Pacific had become an arena of great power competition. France and Russia similarly reassessed their strategic positions in light of demonstrated American capabilities within Spain. News of the disaster at Manila Bay created political crisis that would contribute to the government's eventual collapse. The complete destruction of the Pacific Squadron, without inflicting serious damage on the Americans, revealed the extent of Spanish naval decline. Public opinion turned sharply against the war as it became clear that Spain could not effectively defend its remaining colonial possessions against American attack. Filipino reactions to the battle were initially jubilant, as independence fighters believed that American victory would lead to freedom from Spanish rule. Emilio Aguinaldo and his supporters saw the United States as a natural ally in their struggle for self-determination. However, they would soon discover that American intentions included permanent control of the islands, leading to the Philippine-American War that would last from 1899 to 1902. The long-term consequences of Manila Bay extended far beyond immediate military results. American possession of the Philippines created a permanent Pacific presence that would influence every subsequent crisis in the region. From the Russo-Japanese War through World War II to the Cold War confrontation with China, the strategic position established by Dewey's victory would repeatedly prove its importance to American foreign policy. Commodore George Dewey returned to the United States as perhaps the most celebrated military hero since the Civil War. Congress promoted him to the rank of Admiral of the Navy, a position created specifically to honor his achievement. His victory had demonstrated that American industrial power, combined with professional military leadership and modern technology, could compete successfully with any nation in the world. The Battle of Manila Bay thus represented more than a mere naval engagement. It marked America's definitive emergence as a global power capable of projecting force across vast oceanic distances. The victory established precedents for American overseas expansion while demonstrating the nation's capacity to challenge established colonial empires. In less than 8 hours of combat, the United States had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Pacific and announced its intention to play a dominant role in 20th century international affairs. The echoes of that May morning in 1898 would continue reverberating through American history, reminding future generations that national power, when skillfully applied, could achieve results that transformed the strategic landscape of entire regions. Dewey's triumph at Manila Bay had proven that the American century in the Pacific had begun with thunder of naval gunfire across the calm waters of a tropical bay.